Oh, no, it's just us. Are we going to argue about speakers or laptops or TikToks? Just kidding. Anyway, I really am. I can't hear you, Mark. You're muted.
Apologies. Yeah, far away.
No, I was just going to say, on an earlier machine I had, the speaker was quite good. I remember, especially in the hotel room in Japan, visiting Emily's family, I could actually concentrate. It was just the right level of immersive sound.
Yeah, speakers are better. Definitely. The quality, it's far less tinny in this new MacBook Pro than, say on my MacBook Air, which so doesn't surprise me. There's a bit more space in the case. But, it's if you want it not coming, through earphones or something, it's not at all bad. And it's a beautiful screen. It's just not, 38 inches wide or something.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
No, because it's a really, you do make a really good point. And I think sort of comparing, actually the two LG screens I've got, which are ones that Apple sold, I think they're revolutionary dead end, because I've never seen any other speakers that are USB-C only. Screens. But they're very nice, actually. And apart from the fact that if you set them on to, control your own brightness, effectively they just have a brain fart and either go full on or full off, which can be either sort of frighteningly bright or thinking, oh crap, it's died. But no, I'm actually reasonably well set up. I went, when the lockdown started, I thought this isn't going to be for a few weeks. So I bit on the bullet and I got a second screen, same as the first, so they were kind of a matching pair and at least they sit together. And I got this Logitech screen cam, because at the time the only camera I had was either in my laptop or a real cheapo webcam, which was a bit grungy.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi, Rafael.
Where's my video?
We see you're joining us.
There you go.
Sorry, the contrast on my thing has gone really bad.
Yeah, my lighting comes from this side, so I'm always half and half.
All these things I never used to have to worry about, like have I fallen into unflattering lighting?
Rafael, your friend who has been doing the transcription, what do you think? Should he do some proofing as well? Does he do that kind of work?
I don't know if he would be the best person for proofing, but he does do proofing. And the reason I say that is because, like me, English is not his first language as well. So I would recommend a native to do proofreading.
Okay, Mark, you have a job.
I sort of sense it. Actually, I think I finally sort of slammed in the last of the uni paperwork. So I think I sort of, in fact, I was just thinking, I can actually get back to doing some research, which is what I was thinking. I just not at the beginning of the year. I said, I better update this data set that I last did in sort of 2017. So I did it all up to 2020. I thought, right, now I'll do the research, and here we are, and it's almost a year on and I haven't started.
Did you turn in your?
Oh yeah, this is all to do with because I had some corrections. They took time, and there are also some things going on. There's a weird thing. Actually, it was being discussed in our little uni group this morning. But essentially, with a PhD, when you pass your Viva, that's the point where everyone thinks you've passed. But actually, there are all sorts of other things to do, which may involve next to no work or quite a lot, which all has to be signed off, and there's the usual sort of thing. And then, have you turned in your school mug and all sorts of other crap that basically, it's really funny. You keep sort of talking to people who saying, I keep telling people there's no need for people to know this. And you're thinking, why don't you just write it down? And then we wouldn't annoy you. Just to, do the following things, make sure they're all signed off, done.
Yeah, that's a bizarre situation that I'm going through at the moment too, for sure. So there's few of us today, but there is the issue of community we need to work on building. Rafael, what would you like to do? What would you like us to do?
I think the symposium will be a nice place for us to get more word out. But ultimately, I think community is always connected to putting content out. Either if it's a newsletter or if it's YouTube videos, if it's Medium articles or something, there needs to be content attached so that people can keep coming back. And then this type of content is something that we should discuss. If it's going to be the podcast, the newsletter, a little bit of each, but which one we're going to focus more energy on, because ultimately the community will come from that primarily. That's my thought on it.
Right.
So when I had my YouTube channel, the community was growing because every week I published 2 or 3 videos. And then after a year and a half, it grew to 25,000. So then it depends. People who do Twitch live streams, the more live stream they do, and the better they are, the more viewers and followers they're going to have. So it's basically showing up constantly with content.
Yes.
How should we, if we serialize, hi Peter, if we serialize book 1, for instance, to start with, should we have should it be a mailing list, do you think, or should it be Twitter where you can download an article a day or a week or whatever?
Well, so the newsletter makes the most sense because we're talking about text. So it makes sense that our medium is text. That way we can use text again for future books, future articles, future content. And I think that's the medium most of the people would be more comfortable working with based on our current community. So I would go either newsletter / medium articles, / Substack, things along those lines. I think those 3 communities would be the ones that would make the most sense for future of text.
I think newsletter makes sense in that I think one problem with a lot of the social media it's around is that although they give you a massive reach, I don't think they're necessarily particularly sticky, because as Rafael's just pointed out, actually you become a slave to the machine as long as you keep putting new tidbits in, so people can scroll past going, yeah, oh look, another thing from future text, which is not really what we're trying to do. So it's okay to put it in there, but I don't think I'm not convinced that's necessarily going to give things that stick. I would say I've finally got sorted out and added a follow to the future tech stuff stream you're putting through Twitter, and those look very nice. Those short posts I think work really well. I'm minded listening to you talk about the fact that I suppose I should go back to this idea about trying to do some thematic analysis of the existing future texts that we have, the articles, because one of the things that, so listening to both you and Frode speak, is the sort of sense of being able to do more than, okay, here's one of the articles, but perhaps here's one of the articles, and and not in the sort of trite sense of, if you like this, you might like more of, but you could say it links to these thematic things. So that might link to other documents in the book. It might just perhaps link to another area of interest, because then there's some even small, quite good delivery of value. There's a reason to come back and say, oh, right, so that's connecting with this. Or there are more people writing about this. That's interesting. Or, okay, the stuff that's in the book actually has some relevance because it actually speaks to this area of work. So I don't know, but of course the the missing part there is the thematic analysis of at least a book one. But it's not impossible. And I know, in fairness, so David Lebeau, we ought to go back to his stuff he's done in High Trail and see if we can't, we may be able to effectively leverage out some quite useful, even if it's like a start set of terms that we can then go and do like a peer review on them, something like that. Anyway, those are some thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. And a couple more thoughts related to publishing content as well. If you think about it in like small, medium, and large, and like simple and complex, basically reusing content from the first book falls into the easy. It's just getting it and publishing it. So it's something to keep putting out without a lot of effort. And I'm not a big fan of social media culture because of the mindset of the more you put out, even though it's garbage, if you keep putting out, things will end up happening. So it's like the more you put out, the less quality it has. So there's always this bar of how much should I publish versus how good it is. And then not that publishing slowly is not good as well. There's a lot of YouTube channels as well that publish once a month, but it's a very nicely produced video, and it's longer, and there's more effort put into it. And those communities are also big. But then there's like some YouTubers that I follow that they publish any crap every single day. And the way YouTube works, that 5 years from now, if somebody watches that video, you're still going to get paid by having somebody watched it. So the bigger your library of videos, the better it is for you. And the same thing goes for example, newsletters. Newsletters, people tend to send out once a week. But it's not something that sticks, like you mentioned, Mark. There's one term that I really like for writing content, but it applies to any kind of content. It's called evergreen content. It's content that even if you look at it 10 years from now, it's still going to be useful because it's kind of atemporal. And that's the kind of content that I would like to invest in, especially since we're going to be talking about, the future of text. So it's interesting, no matter when people look for it, which is different than, for example, doing reviews on software. It's outdated a week from now, right? So if we talk about, the underlying structure or things that have a bigger shelf life, that's a lot more interesting when we talk about, the future of text.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to reinvent the whole thing because the chapter, the little section I'm writing in the introduction of that I'm having absolutely horrible time writing is based on, first I say text hasn't really changed over the last couple of decades. And then now I'm saying the environment text is in has dramatically changed. And then I go on to say what text is when it's digital clearly has changed to be smaller units, right, and more connected. That is basically hypertext, and that's what we see with everything, not even text, but other medium like TikTok and so on. So the whole thing of, I'm trying to build a thing to help save the world through helping people who are doing quote unquote important work to study better and produce clearer documentation. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, our community should go much wider than that, but that's where my steel focus is. So this whole thing of just more content, and I completely agree with your analysis, Rafael. Oh no, Alan is getting out of bed. Oh, you got out of bed.
What time is it, Alan, over there?
It is 11:16.
Ah, not bad.
How about yourself?
We are
1:16 for me.
Yeah, I see Peter's got his hand up, Fred.
Yeah, Peter.
Okay, I was saying it might be an interesting exercise for us to step back and think about what we'd like to see in terms of custom hardware. If someone was making a reading note-taking device today, what would that look like? We don't have to actually build it, but just sort of like a set of desiderata, and I think that could make a nice paper, and maybe we could get that into print somewhere.
Yes. And by the way, Alan, for the record, I got a text from Adam saying he was sick. I didn't read it properly, so I actually thought it was you. That's why I said getting out of bed. I'm not insinuating that you are lazy.
I was about to take umbrage with that. You know, thank you for clarifying.
I hope umbrage was taken back. So I was supposed to see you, and then I was like, there's the different letters after the letter A. Alan. Yeah, Peter, you're talking about a whole reinvention thing. And sorry, Alan, we're talking about the social aspect, and we're talking about what we've been going on, you know, in Twitter or social media.
My apologies for being, I was incredibly busy with work, definitely last week. Glad to be here. I've totally missed any conversations that have been going on, so continue.
You just need to do your article. But what I really want to reinvent is something really, really simple, okay? Because the reason I love TikTok, as an example, is it's to the point. You know, maybe I am ahead of myself in generations because I'm a relatively old person, but I cannot, long form stuff, yes. Like Brian Cox talking about the universe, give me an hour, let him repeat it 20 times, I'll enjoy it, I will learn more, fine. And sometimes YouTube, let me watch Battlefield, people blowing each other up repetitively for 30 minutes while I'm working, fine. But if you want to give me a bit of knowledge, don't waffle. My pet peeve is newspapers that start with the first paragraph of some kind of a person walking down the street and having the personal, you know, the next paragraph is a meteor hits, you know, the Pentagon or something, right? So brevity that is connected, I think, really is where we should look at. So I would really like to be able to go through the old book, find, I'm now looking at you, Mark, a bit that you have said, maybe a sentence or paragraph, select that, do a click-a-majig or whatever, and write my own thing of this is important, or I completely disagree, or whatever, and share that in a format that stays open, but also within the world of this book, so that in the future, not only like a Kindle highlight from me to Mark, but they can read my work and see that I have gone through this earlier stuff. I really liked what Mark said. Rafael's thing was funny, etc. You know, really weave a web. It's the best analogy. And how we can do that in a really concise form, I don't know. We talked a little bit about using RSS to communicate. You know, like instead of RSS for a podcast, RSS for PDF and so on. So I'm wondering how we can really push this to be super refined.
I'm taking some notes here.
Well, one part actually that of what you said, I think goes back to Rafael's point about, you know, writing evergreen content. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, at one end you have stuff that's too brief, and at the other end you have, you know, modern science programs which are 5 minutes content crammed into about 2 hours plus adverts, and your mind departs the building after about 15 minutes of watching, which is a shame because often it's something. So we would definitely want to stay away from the verbose, but in fairness, that sort of thing is because it's being yoked to money making. So it's torn up in weird and pointless ways. But so if we're writing in the brief things, so perhaps the most useful things are to go to the more evergreen points. An object, and it's difficult to sort of, yeah, you can look at something and say, I see this and I do or don't slightly agree, and you're trying to make a point, and you've already ceased being really quite brief.
Yeah, I mean, Alan, I can't remember, please forgive me. Were you here in the group on Friday?
No.
So on Friday was after my meeting with Adobe. So I met with Andy Parsons, who was in charge of the stuff that's in Photoshop, so you can check later if an image has been manipulated, excuse me. And also Leonard Rosenthal, who was in charge of PDF. So it was quite a meeting. I was very anxious before I didn't realize so much until afterwards. But anyway, meeting went very well, strongly introduced by Vint, not as a casual thing, but quite forcefully saying, we need to get something out of this.
That's great.
Yeah, very good. Connected on lots of levels, clearly have the same goal of rich metadata, context, semantically rich, all of that good stuff.
Okay.
And at the end, I asked how I should characterize the relationship with Adobe from Visual Meta's perspective. And they said they see that, we'll have a continued dialogue, and they see that the solution will be some kind of a mix of what they're doing, XMP and so on, and Visual Meta. I made it very clear to them that we are not married to any aspect of Visual Meta other than some of it needs to be at the back of the document. So that was all very good. I haven't gotten anything much in writing from them since, which is, of course, a bit stressful.
XMP?
XMP, it's mostly used, in my experience, for photographs. If you want to sell a photograph, you would tag it using XMP.
Okay, that format, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are they talking about that as they had pretty much created the PDF, right? So like, what is this? Are they talking about a newer PDF at all?
They've been doing updates forever, and a lot of useful things. And as they pointed out, a lot of PDFs would not benefit from Visual Meta, absolutely not. But in terms of it being an option when someone chooses to publicize something, and it is a recognized format, that would be good. Like, I didn't want to bring it up, but the PDF they sent me didn't actually have their own metadata in it. I opened it in Acrobat. Right, so the point of just being able to cite something, one of the core issues, they're not doing it yet.
No, sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
I thought it was muted.
Okay. No, I just want to say that if Acrobat supported this at the most basic level, that would be amazing. But it really, I'm at the point now where last Friday we released the final version of Author until business tells us we can do another version. Well, that's good. We have a good version of Author, right? But Pages and Word cannot easily do this stuff. The architecture in Author, which I just thought made sense, never really looked at the other guys, is that when you make a citation, the citation is in that spot on the page until you export. In Word, it's somewhere else, and then they kind of put a little link in and stuff, and it's all disconnected. I think we have, as a community, have to rethink a lot of stuff. I don't think these guys, Microsoft and Apple, even though Microsoft is very vibrant at the moment, are really in a good spot to implement some of this. Because if we do all kinds of cool things with Visual Meta, but it turns out that you use Word and you can't paste with it or whatever, that's not very useful. And the final point is, even Adobe now is so hamstrung. If you, in Pages, if you highlight text and turn it into headings using the style of the document, and then you export that, it still isn't put into PDF. It still doesn't know what the headings are. So it's a bit of a freak out moment.
I'll just put something in the sidebar. If Alan's question about XMP, sorry if I misunderstood, it's a blinding glimpse of the obvious, but I'll just put some notes in there.
Thank you.
It's only because I was doing sort of photo metadata at the time, and more the metadata than the photos, so it was all a bit bloodstained, and it's still stuck in my memory.
Yeah, I feel like I vaguely remember XMP from over a decade ago, but I never knew what it stood for.
Well, I think it was extensible metadata P for, I don't. Basically, Adobe were trying to steal a march. They were basically trying to put their own wrap around XML-based RDF. And it sort of failed because luckily a wider group of people came, all stuff like Dublin Core, all that came along. So I think in the end, you find echoes of it in some Adobe products. Nowhere else though, really, unless they're deliberately trying to retext. So they all have alternate names and things, but that's the Genesis story, I think.
Yeah. So, in our discussion of our type of community building newsletter and so on, yes, we can do what exists, and some interesting things exist, and Peter's showing some of the chat, but it just, to me, seems like some of this needs to be reinvented. I mean, how old is this digital stuff? It's slightly older than us. This is really new. So to let the legacy companies, just because they were successful, I mean, when I did Ted Nelson's kind of special day presentation, the was there and lots of interesting people. I started my presentation saying, the sun is about 4.5 billion years old. It's got another 4.5 billion years to go. Why in the world do we think that we're suddenly at some kind of a pinnacle, right? And the ending of the introduction of the book is on the James Webb telescope, which is going to be launching in December, allowing us to see deeper, clearer than ever before. It's a monumental human achievement, absolutely monumental. There's no real discussion about it. It's kind of in the geeky tech forums. It's such an opportunity to inspire us to do it in other ways. I'm surprised it hasn't, with the climate change thing, why haven't people used that as an illusion, allusion, not illusion. Anyway.
I agree. I agree that we have to reinvent a lot of things, but I think that the biggest issue is that things take a lot of time to gain momentum. For example, video conferencing was horrible before the pandemic. It took a freaking pandemic for people to invest in video cameras and microphones and digital platforms and all of these things, right? And for example, QR codes were invented in 1994, and just now people are starting to use it for different things. So there's I agree we have to reinvent things, but we also have to accept the fact that it takes a long time for widespread adoption to happen. And that adoption happens faster when there's big companies involved. Like suddenly Apple said that there's not going to be Flash anymore, therefore Flash is dead, right? So if we have the support of companies that have widespread adoption, and that's that big four company, then we're going to get there faster. Otherwise, it takes a lifetime, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a great point, Rafael. And just to add to that, like there's also an aspect. So the only thing I can think of that comes close to being a redo of PDFs, and this isn't exactly, but the only thing that comes close that's sort of grassroots would be Markdown. And that's taken obviously a decade plus to get to where it is now, and it's still, plenty of people have never even heard of Markdown. The other side of it, the Flash example and the PDF example, there's almost a network theory approach where some of these things have such a moat around them that you could come at it with the greatest idea and it would still just, all that energy, I don't know, even VC funding, whatever, there are tons of companies that die inside that moat that have tried to innovate on text and annotation. Not to disagree with you.
They just get bought out. Like, they get bought out, right, Alan? Like the big companies buy the little companies.
Or they find that their business model is not nearly as compelling as they thought. It's a tough one for sure.
Yes, but there is a really big yes, but, and that is, I have built a word processor that anybody in the world on a Mac can buy. And it is phenomenally fast, high performance, blah, 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 because of the hardware that exists and because of the libraries that Apple provides. I spent, for me, an absolute fortune, but in terms of a startup company, actually not that much money. And I have something that is demonstrably useful for one audience. Now I got to sell it and all of that stuff. But also the thing we've been talking about, this visual meta thing, in terms of technology, there's hardly anything there. But yes, of course, everything you said about network effect and all of that is there. If we're going to build anything, and I really am stuck on the idea of, I read a sentence by Mark, I want to lift it, write something about it, and for it to be in the world, right? If we're going to build anything like that, I don't think there will be it just has to be compelling for the users enough that it's compatible with other systems.
Let me throw an idea at you, because and also I do want to revisit the newsletter approach, because I think I can provide some help there. But this weekend I was sort of thinking about like how badly I want to have a business, have a startup or something, you know, to invest in, even if it's a simple, not my dream and passion, just something that is like, you know, can be an investment. What would you think about aside, in addition, glommed onto reader and author, a kind of service? Do you think this would be useful? A service that people would pay for, small amount, one-off, that would take a PDF and not only turn it into the markdown form, you know, that easy form, that's easy enough, copy paste, but would also do named entity recognition, extract things, perhaps even clump those things, and then format an individual meta for you, so that what you received, it may still require some finagling, sort of like prompt engineering, where you say like, well, no, this was almost right, but I want to resubmit, and this time equate these two terms together, you know, and then run, right? Do you think something like that would be useful? Do you think that would help add attention to reader and author? Just put that out there.
I'm just having to press a button on our clothes washing machine here, so hence the video stop.
Isn't there an app for that?
Yeah, there should be. Well, when it comes to the named entity recognition, we do have that already in reader and author, and that's cool.
Right.
That's just, you know, thank you, Apple. In terms of a summary, one thing that Livia suggested a long time ago was summaries are great for reading, but they're also great for writing. So it would be great if when you're done writing, it presents a summary for you. And if it doesn't, the summary doesn't say what you wanted to write, you got to rewrite it. So there are many services, I think, that along the lines of what you're talking about would make sense. I mean, some of this is what we're trying to do with author and reader. I mean, for instance, if you do the whole thing with doing a defined concept in author and you export as a glossary, when you're in reader, you can actually Command-Shift-D to see headings plus glossary terms. So you only see them in the document, so you have a better idea of what the author deems to be important for those sections. Many more things we can do like that, absolutely.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking of, and you're right, there's tons of resources out there. The thought behind it is more like an on-ramp to something that is appealing when you hear about it, but tends to be, and this goes for all tools for thought, incredibly intimidating once you actually start to get in, and like you have to do every little thing yourself. So if there was a part of the tools, suite of tools, that ramped you up, that even like created a shadow version of what it thinks you want, and that doesn't crud up your version of it, you know, it's always sort of like shadowy, dimmed out, but gives you that hyperleap.
I see Mark has his hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say, because that sounds to me like, in a sense, that's almost, funnily enough, it almost comes to sound like a set of sort of accelerated tools for using VM. Because when you started describing it, I thought, okay, yeah, there are people out there doing recognition and stuff. And then you mentioned VM, I thought, right, well, this is where it comes back to something useful, because say what you like about VM, at least basically what you're getting is a sort of structured data extract. And that's probably, I think, more interesting, because a lot of these things are available around the place in various things, normally wrapped up inside somebody's proprietary offering. It doesn't mean the data itself is in a proprietary form, but I think the interesting aspect of what you said is saying, no, we're not trying to sell you back your own data. I think that's the one thing
Right.
we're not trying to be Evernote or something, but says, okay, because one interesting thing is, here we are, we're at the start of visual meta and whatever it becomes. Part of what you want is something that said, okay, I'm getting on board with this. What I want is I want to apply this. I want to give myself a sort of bedrock of visual metadata, which if I've got to go and write every document, if every document that has visual metadata, it's got to be one that I've sort of written.
Mhm.
That is quite a commitment. So things that you ramp up effectively the presence of metadata, of visual meta in your organization or in your personal library. I could see be useful. And the other really interesting thing you mentioned is the human in the loop. Say, okay, fine, I get it. This is the first cut. I now realize that this doesn't reflect what I see. And so it's doing the tweaking there. Now that I find really interesting, because that to me, that is an advance. This isn't just relying on the machine. This is taking the affordances the machine offers us and its value add. It's adding this value back into it. That I find quite enticing as an idea.
What do we want? What is the point of this community magazine type thing or newsletter? It is obviously to provide some momentum for the discourse, right? You know, and what is the discussion? There's at least two types of discussions. One is just for fun. I think this font size should be bigger, you know, talking about one detail aspect or technology, whatever it might be. The other one is, oh shit, the planet's burning. We really need to augment our tools for how we actually communicate what we consider to be important, right? I think that in some sort of a newsletter format, I mean, we've talked about having web pages with visual meta, and that's something we have to do. But can we do emails with it somehow?
I would love that. As far as the content that you were talking about, or the range, you know, here's this little tweak versus the world is burning. Personally, I love the interplay of that.
Absolutely.
Right? So
we don't want to do just one or the other.
Yeah, I wrote out something as another little take on the future of text. I guess 2 days ago. That was like, hey, what do NFTs, JFK, and light bulbs have in common? Right. So this week, what we saw was a swarm of people gathering in Houston, anticipating the resurrection of JFK Jr. That was supposed to happen. And he would also announce that he was going to run as Trump's VP. And this is enough people went there to believe this concept, which is easy to make fun of. But then you have another swarm of people that were waiting in line around the block in New York to be given the ability to hang out with other people who have bought a JPEG of an illustrated ape that has been attached to money, NFT, in a totally unproven new vertical of blockchain. And so you've got these extreme examples of people putting, one, a ton of trust in distributed systems, and two, well, I'll get to two in a moment. The other example is light bulbs. So in one sense, my Wi-Fi went out, just, no big deal. But I've been trying out the Google, I have a smart light bulb. So when I realized the Wi-Fi was out, I told Google to turn on the lights. But then of course it couldn't turn on the lights because the Wi-Fi was out. Had it been in a different situation, I wouldn't be able to find the router to reset it. Right? So I'm also a fool of sorts, relying on a distributed system. And the contra example.
Yeah, you don't manage to write any of this down for the book.
I wrote all this down.
All right. Well, you have to send it.
And then the other example is a light bulb was found that was from the World's Fair 140 years ago, and it still works. It's Edison's design.
I read about that.
Yeah. We probably subscribe to the same newsletter. And so that's the antithesis of these other examples. It's anti-fragile, this Edison light bulb, whereas these other examples are highly, we've thrown ourselves lemming-like into highly fragile distributed supply chains. And where that loops into the future of text is text itself is like Edison's light bulb. It's a very good design. It has always rebuilt itself and it stays cohesive. But we're putting text into this situation continually of being in these fragile distributed networks. A perfect example of that mentality is Web 3 and the metaverse, which the central conceit of that is, this whole digital transformation web thing is going so well. The only problem is that there isn't enough of it. As opposed to going back and saying, how are we searching? What are these really painful fault lines that we have in our current system? There's no interest in fixing those because those are very deep textual problems. Anyway, I'll stop there, but that's an example of the kind of newsletter I'd like to see.
Something that rests on that actually was prompted by a comment sort of back towards the beginning of the thing was just the thing of actually your point about failure is the impermanence. And I think perhaps an irony, one of the reasons the web took off, of course, is it was tolerant of failure. But perhaps we've learned the wrong lesson from that. We now design things that just fall over and we don't worry anymore. It's, we're here in UK, actually, one thing that's remarkably lucky is the infrastructure is actually pretty rock solid. Bar a really, really big hurricane, storm, it's very rare that the lights or anything go out. And I can remember flying out going all the way to California back in the 80s, and we got there, and north of the bay, there was no power. And so having flown halfway around the globe at vast expense in those days, we sat in a restaurant and imagined what we were going to see, because it wasn't there. So I think in this way, actually, one of the things we should be thinking on is not building in an expectation of failure. It's a good thing to be tolerant of it, but I wonder if we've almost become a sort of, not so much dependent, but we just don't care in a way that we should. And one other thing, just before I shut up, is something actually, it was a comment Frode made, I don't know whether it's this morning or earlier in this, about the meeting with Adobe, and they'd commented that, well, our metadata is sort of close to the point of relevance, i.e. within the document. And I thought, well, that's either I'm lucky or prescient, because in the sense that's partly in a way what I was thinking when the piece I've written for the current feature of text, which says, well, how in our tools do we basically apply, for want of a better word, metadata, so that we can say, this paragraph and this paragraph are actually connected, so that you're able to take these bits and pass them around. I mean, I'm not at this stage proposing an answer, but I'm proposing that we've got past the point where we should stop pretending that it's not something we should address. Because if it isn't there in our writing tools, we're in yet another thing where we're going to fall in this thing of, well, if we throw enough computer horsepower at it, it'll magically sort it out. And I don't think it will, because one of the things here that we're trying to capture is something that still is partly an internal human process. So it's actually quite important that we can, as we're writing, have the option, where it's relevant to what we're writing, to sort of be seeding the metadata. And the VM, in a sense, strikes me as the outer edge of this. So this is all perfectly cromulent, of a piece to me. But if we can push that further in, and just even having the headings is an interesting point.
So I had
that's good.
I had a meeting with the assistant to a former president of Romania today to set up an interview for the book, which is nice. But I noticed in her name tag, it said Institute of the Levant. So I asked her what that is. And it's a kind of a premier research group they've set up, because they're saying the Levant, if you look at the whole region, North Africa, Israel area and the North, it's been an area of immense innovation through history, mostly peaceful and not so much recently. So they have this institute, they're doing all kinds of things. You can look at the website, fancy things. But I think the problem that we, not necessarily for a newsletter, but in the big, really have to address is, here we are reading a document from the president of Romania saying such and such that we agree with or don't agree with. How in the gosh darn world can we select some of that, say something about it in a manner that remains broadcast and relevant, not just in our own PDF stack, not just an hypothesis sharing with that community? How can we do that? And in a way that can go back to him, in a way that he doesn't feel it's spammy, but he can reflect on it. So this comes down to temporal modes of communication. It's a little bit slow. It's basically about producing a new thing. I'm going to call it a document. And the act of publishing is, I think, is really, really important. Some of these networks, Hypothesis and Google Docs and so on, they don't really publish, they just continue. So I think that is so important. I mean, like today, Obama is making all kinds of statements at the climate thing, some of them very political, maybe some useful. Where's the document we can share and argue over points? I mean, I have this notion of I keep thinking about Mark's article, selecting something and not just plaps, but almost like two magnets that are opposed. So almost some kind of visual interaction where there's like, boom, now I move it and now I have it. If we were doing a sci-fi movie a couple of weeks and we could decide this, as Alan said, getting it into the world is the problem. But if we make it so absolutely ridiculously demonstrably useful.
Well, part of, I mean, it's interesting you say that because, sorry, just quickly, is it part of the answer to your question is, well, in days of yore, that sort of reference, that point of reference would have been, sort of broadsheet, non-tabloid newspapers, but that ship sailed. I don't think it's coming back again. And we are actually bereft of a trusted reference other than the originator themselves publishing something. And one other thing on this issue of commenting that I'm still trying to wrap my head around is the scaling issue, because I may write something about your article, and Alan may write something about your article. Then after 50,000 people have written it, at some point it dissolves into a mass of +1 and likes, not deliberately, but just because of an effect of scale. Yeah, and so there's an interesting aspect there as well. But it doesn't argue against these things. It's just
no. I don't think you are. But yeah, sorry. Alan was also saying something.
No. Go ahead. I mean, there's a lot to be said about that, and it's honing in on some good themes.
It's just in the section I'm really desperately trying to finish for the introduction of the book. I'm talking about how text today is smaller and more connected. That just seems to be a fact. I may be wrong, but it seems to be a fact, right? So, sorry. So that text threw me off. Yeah, right. So long form, okay, McLuhan, the way he analyzed, media will reverse on itself and all of these things, the media tetrad, it's quite useful. One of the things is if you agree on a point, you probably agree on exactly the opposite as well when it comes to media. So for example, old documents in long form, there's nothing wrong with them. They have their absolute use. But how you consume them should be through different things. So if you do the kind of stuff we're talking about, and at the end of the day, produce a darn PDF, as long as it's encoded or whatever we want to call it in a manner that allows for, oh God, I hate the phrase, surfacing of what's inside it. As long as that document is alive and connected, then a myriad of systems can go in and find out who commented what and so on, right?
Something I'm thinking but about visual meta is that it's something that will always need to be, kind of, like you said, easy to implement, because it's something that we're always going to be on the backstage. The visual meta is not, it's not a tool. It's something that adds more more contextual information about things with all of the metadata. So it doesn't matter where it's applied, it's always going to be, it's in the process of becoming a standard of sorts, right? That will be implemented by tools and services and platforms and things like that. So then being in the backstage, I think it's going to go along the routes of how emojis are deployed and chosen. I don't know if any of you are familiar with how that works. But basically, once a year, new emojis come out, and you have to send, a proposal of why that emoji is important to be implemented. And then all of these companies make the drawing based on their design language. So, Microsoft has their own emoji drawing, Facebook has their own emoji drawing, things like that. But the standards for emojis, they go through this process, and it kind of, I feel like visual meta would follow along the lines of being this institution that, has this group of people that approves new meta, new tags, for the implementation of all of these companies. So I would look at, how emojis work, because not for the emojis themselves, but for the way they structured the process of approving and paperwork and documentation, so that all of the big companies implement emojis in all of their systems, because visual meta goes along the same lines.
I want to say something about the fantastic comparison and way to think. Because emojis actually they work, they're a system, they also have, their value is immediately apparent. And so if I'm thinking of VM versus emoji, one of the concerns of VM is that it is set up along the lines of the semantic web of Sparkle and things like this that never really caught on because it's so incredibly daunting. I'm sorry, ouch. And so what that kind of reminds me of too is an evolution in how science was done from the time period of Agassiz, I think, to Darwin. Initially, there was this feeling of if we just categorize everything, it'll all fall into place, and we can figure out over time how all these delineations work. And Darwin sort of wasn't interested in that at all. He was more interested in what are the differences in the tiny relations between these two things. So to bring that all back around, I would love to see a version either within visual meta or I don't know, but something to get to the broader point that we were talking about earlier, like what is the new kind of tool? For me, it would be something that is totally open-ended, that it isn't like a shadow document of the thing. It's totally open-ended. I can be as complete or incomplete as I want. And what it gives me the superpower of is just saying, this is like that. And whether that is in the PDF or not, I can just start to, it's almost as free and simple as emojis, and I don't have it all figured out, but I wanted to put that forward as to that Darwinian way of thinking, if that would be satisfying for people to just, if it was easy to say NFTs are like light bulbs. I'm just gonna leave that there. Anyway, crazy thoughts.
Yeah, well, I mean, emojis, just to go on that, are great, but they lack grammar and they are too specific. Even though I come from a visual background, a picture of a cat is much less information rich than the word cat, because it represents only one cat, that particular cat.
That's a page in Scott McCloud's book, Frode.
That's a great book.
But it's because he shows the images of people, and the
Yeah.
more abstract it is, the more it can.
No, absolutely.
Represent.
And you know, I'm a huge fan of TapBack. Like with Mark Anderson, you know, we often have
Mm.
text discussions. You know, to write okay, we don't do that often anymore. It's a thumbs up or a heart, right? It is much better. So please don't think that I'm against visual expansion of text. I'm absolutely not. But I'm wondering, you know, to really bring the big picture forward, you're reading something that someone has written somewhere in a considered format. Let's call it a document, a paper. Let's call it a paper. And you want to note that down for yourself, or you want to immediately reply, or you want to note it down so that later on when you reply, it is connected to that thing, right? And then someone reading that can follow those connections. That seems to be really at the core of a considered discourse, right? Where we're not just throwing statements out there.
Yeah, I mean, and smaller and more connected is definitely the lesson I sort of absorbed from unintentionally, you know, what started as my notepad, I sort of turned into a website, just information about something. But yeah, and all the froth about whether you use block references or something isn't really the issue. It's about understanding in your writing that the addressability is not something to do with it's not manifested by the technology.
So
just because it's not because you put in paragraph tags, but you know that this paragraph or these paragraphs need to basically live in a separate little space to those ones. Otherwise, they're always going to be mussed up together. And sometimes people need to see this little group of paragraphs separated from those other ones, or they'll never get the point that you're trying to make to them. I mean, that's a strong thing to say. And you know, this is why I'm not surprised, as I said to you this morning, to hear the sort of pushback in communities like sort of Rome and Obsidian, and people are already beginning to say, well, it's wonderful, but what's the point?
Frode, is that visual canvas something like creating a digital mind palace of sorts?
Yeah,
this is mental canvas, right?
Yeah, mental canvas. Yeah. So clearly, we want this kind of interaction for textual data, right? And of course, text plus image should happen. But I mean, this is crazy.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
that is neat. Yeah.
Right? And we've had so many different 3D tools for such a long time. So it really now is a matter of how we allow people to actually make and consume this, right? Like I say in the opening of the book, Edgar is 4.5. He's expected to learn basic reading and writing by the time he's 5. But when it comes to making visual, rich information, it's going to take him a lot longer than that. You know, anything that's in front of his iPhone or my iPhone, he can record. But anything that isn't immediately in front of him, it's going to take many, many years to learn how to turn that into a real solid presentation. So visual is hard. Not to dismiss it, but how can we maybe combine it? How can we have such a rich kind of 3D environment of that stuff comes here, you know, Minority Report, whatever. As long as somebody can get stuff, think about it, put stuff, share stuff, and people can follow it. We're talking about citations, but we're talking about upping the game, right?
Yeah. I'm all for that. That's where my heart is. That's also sort of like the metaverse. But I think at the same time,
how would visual meta work in the metaverse? Like, how can we get more information
about the damn metaverse? Okay, I'm a gamer. You all know that. On Friday, Battlefield 2042 is being released to us early people. So my wife will be a widow for the weekend. The interesting thing about computer games regarding the metaverse is, you know, we had Second Life and all of that stuff, right? The assumption is that if you're an absolute nerd or you like the new stuff, you're happy to have a character walk in space, text bubble, you know, it's like for the novelty of it. But if you're selling a game today, the amount of polish for how you move, how you lift your rifle, the sound of your rifle, how it interacts with the building, cover, the command system, audio, the atmosphere. It's absolutely crazy, many, many millions just to get that right. So for Facebook, just to make a social space where we don't even have guns. All right, it's something like that will happen along the lines. But
I think
there's
that
gotta be a
is
reason to be in
that is
this
not
place.
necessarily what the metaverse. If that is what the metaverse
I'm
is,
just saying
then
there's
that'll
got to
be
be
an
a lot of
abysmal
polish
failure.
in that whole massive thing. That's all I'm
Yeah,
saying.
it's ridiculous, and it's absolutely missing the point of and I hope it actually, that's not what the metaverse is like, that it's not just VR. I think it's it'll hopefully be much lower fi, but the idea being more like recognize, okay, so this is another one that I started to write about, recognizing that the bit is the universal medium now. That we've been with, there's this book called The Biography of the Pixel, where the author, who's the guy behind Pixar, makes the claim that in 2000, we experienced the great digital convergence. And that was the flip, if you will, of when all media became primarily bit driven, digital. And so either it was made through digital or it was experienced through digital. And so that's sort of, and that goes into some other interesting characters. But with the metaverse, I think it's more like the intent is, hey, we've been doing things in this weird gallopy, like weirdly shaped car called the internet. I mean, as wonderful as the internet is, but all these other email, all these other things that we have are all sort of awkwardly fit together. Let's now just accept the fact that we're going to be digital from here on in, and treat it all cohesively as a single unit, single medium, is, I think, the aspirational goal.
Well, okay, sorry, Alan, could you just type the full name of the book so we waste our money on it?
MIT
Yes,
Press.
I'll even put it up for the.
Yeah, hold on, I've got the URL. Just
Let's do two at once then, because I want to recommend this one.
Ooh, nice.
Ooh, what's-
history of reading. All right.
A History of Reading by Alberto Mangan.
While we're on that topic, let me write that down, A History of Reading. I stumbled onto, and I've been checking out, I don't have an opinion of it yet, but it's good so far, I think. It is called The Ascent of Information by Caleb Scharf. There's some very interesting bits in there. I'm only early on in it, but.
So I have a couple of thoughts on the metaverse conversation. So if basically connecting to Frode's point, a lot of things have been done with video games that just nowadays the more general public is coming in contact with. So the idea of the metaverse, like we've had MMORPGs, most massively multiplayer online role-playing games for quite a while. And MMOs are basically metaverse, like in every single way. People can connect, go into an avatar, go to a specific area of the game, sit down and have conversations, have meetings, discuss basically anything you want. It just doesn't have, the open your webcam to do things. But I feel like there's a lot of catching up for the general public on basically what we have been doing as gamers for the past, 20 years or more. There was a game I used to play when I was a lot younger called Ragnarok Online. And, it's these little pixel art, little avatars made with sprite sheets and things like that. And the amount of time that we spent on the game, just sitting and talking, this was a lot before we've had, video conversations, even audio conversations. It was just like an IRC, forum inside a game. But nevertheless, it was kind of like the metaverse, because you would go into this digital space, seeing a digital avatar, seeing other people, and you would have conversations with them and interacting with them and things like that. Where I think the metaverse will be very useful will be in augmented reality, because it's extracting more information or displaying more information from the world around us. And I think that's where, visual meta has to be, in those frontiers of, oh, I see you are looking at this book. Well, here's all of the important information you need to know about this book. It could be, I don't know, I don't want to say ISBN codes because it seems to be outdated when you're looking at it in an AR, but what is the complementary information you will see when you're using, these augmented reality glasses in the real world? And I feel like all of the meta information that will be shown, it's in the realms of visual meta. And that's why I think the name shouldn't change, because if we're using glasses, it's going to be visual, and it's going to be visual metadata of the things that we are seeing in the world around us. So I think that's where I see, going into the future, where we would fit in, because Apple's working their AR glasses. I feel like being a hardware product, there's a bigger barrier of entry, but eventually it's going to be like smartphones where everybody has one.
I agree with you to a large extent, but I think it's worth pointing out things like foveal vision. We have acuity for a small area. For the kind of work I do, when I do pictures, I use a big screen, but most of my writing, I prefer the 13-inch MacBook. Otherwise, it's got to move my head too much, right? Mark does more research, so he's got to move his head too much. But I really think that the world is messy. 3D, of course, it'll be amazing. But unless there are a real reason for it, like for instance, now, all of us look ridiculous. We're badly filmed. I do think that with, LiDAR scanners or something, we will look like nice avatars soon. That's something we expect, right? And that'll have a real benefit, and maybe placing you around the table. But other than, having markers and doing large pieces of paper and taping it on the wall, I'm not sold that normal knowledge work will really instantly benefit just because it is in a world space that looks more than the world space.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, that was the end of that, really.
My 2 cents on that, just throw it, is I definitely think that the next big cognitive shift that civilization is going to go through, I don't know if I can speak any more grandiosely than that, is moving to a model of games. I think like in the same way that we thought that the body was like an engine, steam engine, and then we think that right now the mind is like a computer. I think the next big metaphor will be that games are our central operating function. And so while I'm not attached to the aesthetics or the surface realization of the metaverse or anything, that direction I think is kind of inevitable. And I wouldn't even be surprised if knowledge work becomes like a game or like gambling, like something that you're addicted to, that you also have to do, that you get money for, but you kind of enjoy, but you also feel like it's ripping your life out of yourself. I see a lot going there, and I actually think that there's an interesting future, terrifying future where we have non-fungible text blocks, in the sense that we annotate the way that people mine Bitcoins now. Our proof of work will be in our annotation and connecting meanings and concepts, and that'll be sort of like that'll be an economic driver. Anyway.
I have Apple TV Plus, highly recommended. I've been watching The Foundation, which is lovely. Have you all seen some of it?
Yes.
Beautifully realized. And of course, very non-computer screeny, which is really, really nice. Proper sci-fi, but also there's another one that I refuse to watch. Well, probably watch it anyway. It's called Invasion. Have you seen the ads for it, or have you ever seen it?
I saw it at the start, but I haven't watched it yet.
The reason I'm saying it is that if we had an alien invasion, humanity would figure a way to work together, like the Russians had to do at the Battle of Stalingrad. It would be all hands on deck. the Battle of Stalingrad, I don't know how much you know about it, but that was an example of the Russians had more men than weapons. So you will be sent into battle with no weapons, expected to find something from a killed comrade and use that, right? It's pretty extreme. Now, a corollary to this rambling is another comment. So on some social media, someone said that everybody's afraid of traveling back in time. And if you do a small change, you can have butterfly effect rippling through and changing something important. But nobody seems to think that we can do the same thing now. We can do small things now
for the future. Yes,
exactly. So to me, it comes down to, we have the pandemic, which has certainly gotten a bigger response than hardly anything else, even though there's been lots of issues. But when it comes to climate change, it is an issue in itself, but it's also representative of kind of an invasion from outer space without the glamour, right? And when I looked at the Levant people earlier today, they are saying that they need in their region of the world to figure out how to stop fighting. So I really think that one of humanity's greatest intellectual achievements is symbolic communication with grammar. Grammar being hugely important. Otherwise, it would only be, hieroglyphs or emoticons. There's got to be something that at least mentally we can think about for our community, in our newsletter or document or whatever we might call it, that can somehow help us be inspired to think that the stuff in here is as, at least in poetic ways, as connected and interactive as anything you would have in Minority Report or any kind of sci-fi. It just shows the way forward to how to really engage with the discussion. We all know people here who may be anti-vaxxers. We all know people probably who don't think climate change is a big thing. Those are only two big examples. There's got to be a way we can change it. And it's not going to be with 3D and movies and stuff like that. It just ain't.
But one thing,
I mute myself now.
In terms of small changes, of course, the slight bit of hubris in this is absolutely we could do things now that make big changes in the future. The problem is that would we know which was the change to make? I mean, this is the problem: is we tend to think, right, we try and imagine the outcome, and I think a lot of the things that happen didn't necessarily happen because Mr. Gutenberg says, right, I am going to change the future of the planet by building movable type or something. I'm sure it was far smaller than that, and that's so. We're absolutely right. We can make changes.
This is where I friendly and rudely interrupt you. This is Stalingrad. Doug talked about this before these things. He said his problem of his life was he felt he climbed up on this mountain, looked into the future, and he said this. We're hurtling towards many, many clear and present dangers, so to speak. Right? We are there. It's just that we don't really have the imagination to aggressively address it. Urgent complex problems is what he called it, right?
Be careful of aggression. I mean, part of our problem at the moment is that we talk about wanting to persuade people, and actually where we always end up is having a shouting match with people because we just refuse to accept a different view. And everyone feels, that they have a point. I mean, and yet in amongst it, you see that actually change is done by just constantly reaching across more than halfway across the divide. So I think it's about making, providing means for communication is probably one of the most positive things for better communication, better referencing, better intercommunication is probably more use than us all wandering around in, Second Life.
Mark, it's not about protolizing. It is exactly.
Let me throw some curiosity notes at you guys. Okay, so in 200 BC, Aristophanes of Byzantium invents punctuation. Before then, written words were strung together in one continuous line. And then, in 1455, Gutenberg invents the printing press, right? I always love looking at timelines because they make it so you see how long things take. This is like from punctuation to the first book published, it took 1,200 years. I mean, come on.
Not necessarily though, because if you include China in there, you've got
China, yes. but yes.
But same
China
idea,
is-
yeah.
Yes, the same idea. But I mean, even if you include China, I mean, it's hundreds of years. And you would have thought that, okay, we have punctuation. Now let's sit down and talk about what can we do better, to make this more, more shareable, things like that.
But
Things are a lot faster nowadays, but even still, I mean, we have, and connecting with Alan said, we have people like Ted Nelson that have dedicated their entire lives to something. And what Alan just said is selling blocks of text. I have a paragraph for sale. I think Ted Nelson had written, you should be able to sell little bits of text of information, but we still don't have that. We have NFTs for images, but we don't have a lot of different things.
Rafael, I think your point is right on. And that is, by the way, in the timeline in the book, that reference you're making. But an even scarier one is it took quite a while to invent the can opener after the can was invented. Which is just a beautifully absurd situation.
That's hilarious.
But then it goes back to the very beginning of the conversation, because I think that we can make absolute massive changes without a huge financial or other investment, provided we find that little Archimedes point, that little lever to stand and show this is truly a useful thingamajig.
Well, it's that perspective, because the interesting point, Rafael, was you mentioned the sort of timeline. Well, of course, the thing is, way back when, reading or speaking or recording stuff was different. It's like reading at the moment about the birth of sort of indexing, and the idea that you'd index anything alphabetically was pointless, because everyone knew that the divine things came first, and then the humans and then the animals, because everybody knew that. The idea that you needed to put spaces in words to make them easier to read. Well, what's the point? Because it's only the certain people read them. So in other words, so a lot of the delay is because people actually haven't spotted the context to do something. So I think that's really what phrase perhaps driving at. So one of the things, so many of these things are before us, ready to be brought forward. So it's finding ways to offer up those new contexts, because if the idea is sort of compelling enough, once it's given some light, it will normally draw itself forward. Otherwise, you're in the world of normal business, where you take some pointless idea and you say the same catchphrase lots of times, throw a bucket of money at it, and hope to God it sticks. And I don't think that's the path we want to go down. But so one thing that's interesting is perhaps to look at the things we have now that are not connected, they're not leveraging one another, and see if there are some new connections, or the connections are probably there, they just want emphasizing. And again, I think that's partly what VM is doing in its very broad sense. I mean, that's part of the attraction to me. This whole idea is that it is actually offering the opportunity for better and more robust communication.
Yeah, I think just my final point is, if we had to, if we take a step back and just think about what are the things that we want to contribute to the timeline, which is it basically is that we are doing things that some of it we will use in our in our timeline, in our lifetime, but some of it we will not. And then I really love the project for Future of Text, and Frode has been putting already 10 years in the symposium on things like that. And basically it is structuring the Future of Text to have this sort of manifesto of what we want to achieve and where we're going, to serve as sort of a guideline for for other people when they come participate in. They have an idea of where they can collaborate, what's been done, what has been archived, what has been published, all of those things. And I really like the idea of manifestos because it connects people and they find like a north to follow. And that's why I ended up joining the Future of Text, because I felt, and it is true, because I felt that, the work that is being done is being done here is something that is for the future. And I remember one of the presentations, one of the introductions for one of the events. It really struck with me because Frode was saying, you managed to gather a large amount of people to talk about this, and it's people, like Vince Cerf, like Ted Nelson, like Doug Engelbart, and all of these people that have been working on this. So I really feel like it is that continuation. So I think for us, I see myself part of the community, and part of this is to keep structuring this as something, even bigger, that, people can participate and keep going, keep making the timeline bigger, basically, or not letting the timeline of text evolution and books and knowledge and all of those things die off. Because, God forbids, that's usually, it's the first thing that is destroyed in wars. People go after libraries and universities, and they want to destroy culture, they want to destroy knowledge, they want to destroy information. And that's where we go in. I feel like, kind of like a stewards of this area, of keeping this alive.
Just to add a counterpoint, which goes along with the sort of feeling I have that we could talk about all kinds of large talk, and I love the conversations, but that doesn't mean you have any better chance of, I think, coming up with that Archimedes point, or even having that Archimedes point catch on. I think that there's a lot of other factors in our cognition that don't meet with words. And so a lot of these things it can't be designed. A lot of it just happens. But the counterpoint is from the book Ascent of Information, which is all about this concept it comes up with called the dataome. Anyway, in Southern Australia, the Japorong people maintained a story about a specific hunt that took place for a species of giant bird that no longer exists. This was probably I won't say the name, a fowl that stood as much as 2 meters tall and lived until perhaps 30,000 to 10,000 years ago, with a lineage going back at least 8 million years. Not only did their story detail the perils of tackling these large, strong birds, it had enough specifics about the hills and rocks of the landscape and the conditions of locally erupting volcanoes to enable modern geological measurements to be used to pin down and confirm the tale's historical timeline. So they have an oral culture still to this day that goes back 10,000 years. Which is just to say there's probably been a lot of inventions of some sort or another that aren't around anymore. There's probably been a lot of tools for thought that enable it in a certain way, and maybe in that case it's optimized towards maintaining lineage, but perhaps not the acquisition of new ideas. And the flip side might be, well, how effective are all these new ideas? What does it do for us necessarily? Anyway, I don't have a complete thought there, just thought I'd put it out.
But you will put a complete thought in a article soon.
Frode, I'm going to send you my bio, and I have to go. I have another meeting in 5 minutes.
Yeah, I got to go too. But guys, let's think about some kind of a community item of discussion that can actually embody some of these ideas. We may turn out to be just email newsletter, nothing wrong with that, but I think we deserve to go in a circle to see if we can tweak it somehow.
Yes. All right, guys. All right. See you all on Friday.
Friday.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.